and welcome to the final edition of IIEA Insights until September. The European Commission is an utterly unique institution in world political history. A genuinely supranational executive cum civil service, it wields real power in some areas, most notably competition and external trade policy. It is with great pleasure to host today Barbara Nolan, who's recently departed to the Commission after decades of service. Today, we'll get Barbara's insights on how the Commission works, how it has changed over the years, its relations with the other EU institutions and member states, as well as her reflections on some of the policy areas she's been directly involved with. So with that, Barbara, many thanks for joining us today. It's a real pleasure and looking forward to hearing your insights on the Commission from the inside with your decades of experience. So first thing, Barbara, to ask you, you joined the Commission when Jacques Delors was president of that institution. Huge amount has changed since then, including lots of new people from the new member states. How has all that changed how the Commission functions over your experience there?
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you to the Institute for inviting me here today. I mean, this is my personal reflection. I'm not a spokesperson for the Commission anymore, so I just wanted to put that down for the record. Yes, I started working in the Commission at the end of 1985. Jacques Delors was the president. There were only 12 member states. Staff numbers were much smaller, so we had about around 19,000 compared to, say, 32,000 today. So it was a more intimate place. And arguably easier at times to sort out disagreements, conflicts on a person-to-person basis. We became 15 in 1995 with Austria, Finland and Sweden joining. But I think the major change in culture came with the Big Bang enlargement that took place in 2004 under the Irish presidency, if we recall. And when 10 member states joined, 10 new member states, eight of which were from Central and Eastern Europe, so former communist countries. And immediately, almost overnight, it seems like the working language changed from being sort of French and English to being English, because this was the language that many of the new recruits, and there were many, knew. So there was quite a flood of new people coming in from these countries. We also had 10 new commissioners added to the college, which of course meant that portfolios had to be sliced and diced to make sure everybody had a job in this new scenario. And I think that this has led to probably the need for a more centralized management approach to ensure that the Commission continued to work smoothly with this Big Bang addition of new member states. And maybe it's how we have got to a more presidential style Commission that we see today. We have a much stronger and bigger Secretariat General, which is the overall coordinating department in the Commission. And I think it's probably, that's a fact of life, because it's got so big. But I would also say that despite the growing numbers at the top table, if you like, it hasn't really led to major difficulties, although this may change when we have another enlargement. I mean, we've 9 candidate countries at present, and in the queue, if you like, to join, and therefore, it's going to get bigger and bigger. And will it become unwieldy? We have to see. But of course, the weekly meetings of the heads of cabinet, which precede the Commission meeting every week, that is the zone to sort out conflicts and diffuse conflicts before the meeting of the college. And I think it has to be said that it's still very rare for a vote to be taken in the college. Very, very rare. Agreements are normally reached by consensus, and that has remained so despite, the tripling, if you like, of member states. So, they're my reflections. As I said, the culture changed quite a lot, particularly with, as I call it, the Big Bang enlargement.
Right. So, as you say, that enlargement had an effect. Brexit was a pretty traumatic experience, particularly in this country and obviously in Britain itself. But to what extent has the departure of Britain, changed how the Commission functions? I presume there are a few. I think all the British people were allowed to stay on, but clearly they're not taking any British people in. How has that changed the Commission?
Well, I mean, you know, obviously the UK was a major player and a major influencer in the life of the Commission. And I mean, it was also often a blocker or a veto player in a way in the system. So in some areas, the UK's departure may have simplified decision making and allow agreements to be reached faster. And I think also Brexit has brought about probably more solidarity and internal cohesion between the remaining member states. And I think Ireland was a beneficiary of that during the Brexit negotiations. And I think people in Ireland saw how other member states stood by Ireland. I mean, and I think that shows when you're a member of the club, you have certain rights, and you also can rely on your fellow members of the club to support you. When you're out of the club, you can't expect to have the same treatment, and I think that was definitely shown in the whole Brexit negotiations. From the outset, the Commission was determined that Brexit would not overshadow the business of the work of the Commission. And indeed, there was a dedicated team, as you know, set up under Michel Barnier to look after the Brexit negotiations and to basically, I think, keep that separate from the rest of the business of the Commission. And I think they succeeded in that to a large extent. Of course, there were flare-ups from time to time. I mean, we all watched the cinema from the House of Commons. But I think basically, the business of the Commission continued. But of course, the UK leaving has led to a re-evaluation of power balances and the formation of new alliances. And I think that's an area, I think, Dan, that you were interested in. I mean, we now have, the frugal four of sort of Austria, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, focused on budgetary matters. We also have the new Hanseatic League with the Baltic and Nordic states and the Netherlands focused on trade. So there are different alliances, if you like, now that the UK, well, they were probably there already, but since the UK have gone, it has kind of forged, the creation of stronger alliances between the remaining member states. And Ireland, I think, we saw during the Brexit negotiations, actively used the EU mechanisms and funding to mitigate the effect of Brexit on both on Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we got the whole and the withdrawal agreement, we got the whole protocol, etc., which tried to mitigate some of the damage of Brexit on relations between the UK and Ireland, but also obviously the border area. So I do think there have been some realignments as a result of the UK leaving the EU.
Let's get into the alliances and Ireland's alliances a little bit later. But before we leave on that one, just one of the things that I've noticed over the years following the European Commission, and certainly when I worked there briefly in the 1990s, one thing one doesn't hear very much anymore is that the Commission is a friend of small countries. And I date this maybe to the time of the Euro crisis, that since then, small countries don't view the Commission as an ally. Indeed, if anything, there may be some concern among the smaller countries that the bigger countries have too much influence over the Commission. It's become a more political entity. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm not sure I would ever have described the Commission as the friend to small member states, but in its role as an independent body and sort of the guardian of the common interest, if you like, the Commission does tend to act as a counterweight to the big member states pushing their agenda, and it does take on board smaller member states' views. And indeed, as an institution, I think it is a very open and receptive institution to, you know, inputs from the member states and concerns of member states. I would say one thing, though: they need to be very active at the early stages of policy formation or legislative formation, because that's when they can really make an impression and a mark. When things get to a later stage and it's actually a Commission proposal, it gets more difficult to, you know, influence things. But I think, you know, the Commission is, you know, this hybrid body. We've political and technocratic duties, and you know, we have to weigh up all the different elements. So I wouldn't say it was ever seen as a friend as such, but certainly as a body that does take smaller member states' views into account.
Maybe a sort of follow-up question in terms of how things have changed. The country I know best, the old euphemism, people working in the institutes rather than actually naming their own country. And I suppose there certainly was in the past a strong sense that of loyalty to the institution itself and to the broader project. With, as you say, the huge culture change that came about, particularly with the Big Bang enlargement, has there been a change in culture within the Commission in terms of people having a little bit more interest in the articulating the views of the country they know best, or do people leave their nationalities at the door in terms of how they act and behave within the Commission, and does it differ from country to country?
Well, I think people are I mean, first of all, we want people from different countries and different backgrounds. That enriches, I think, the policy formation, legislation, etc. We need people who know how things work in the different member states. So it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. However, you know, Commission officials must also adhere to ethical standards and take decisions based on the public interest, and declare conflicts of interest and maintain professional secrecy, all those things that apply to civil services, public services across the board. And you know, the Commission has been constantly, if you like, reminding people of these duties, both at the staffing level, but also at Commission level. Like, how can we forget, for example, the resignation of the Santer Commission, which started sort of from an issue with Mrs. Quesson's dentist, if those long memories will remember. And I mean, it ultimately, you know, brought down a commission. And this led to huge reforms about enhancing transparency and accountability. And also the European Parliament gained a more prominent role in holding the Commission to account. So there was a shift in the balance of power there as a result of that whole drama. And you know, every cycle, every different commission, there is often new rules added to those rules. And you know, we recently had eight institutions setting up an EU ethics body to develop a common culture of integrity and ethics in the EU institutions, as a result of Qatargate, which was happening in the European Parliament. So, you know, there is always attempts to, I mean, we have incidences that have to be tackled, but I think in general, people are very, you know, committed to taking decisions in the common interest and not letting national interests dominate. And, you know, I think when people do show those traits, they're very quickly put into line. I think it's not really acceptable.
And do governments seek to pressure Commission officials any more or less than they used to, or is that something that's their own nationals? Is that a factor in how things work?
Not in my experience, but it may happen with other nationalities. I mean, I think if there is a particular national interest, it's really to the cabinets of the commissioner responsible, or through the cabinet of the commissioner of the same nationality, where certain concerns may be shared. But it's not usual, I think, to lean on individual members of staff. No, I would. That's pretty rare.
So you arrived back in Dublin to run the Commission's office in October. Was it October 2010, just as Ireland was going into a bailout? It certainly seems to me, and maybe it's my sort of economics background, that the biggest crisis the European project has ever faced was the Euro crisis, bigger than the migration crisis or the Brexit crisis or empty chair crisis going back a long time. First off, I'd like to ask you, would it be your view that the Euro crisis was the biggest crisis of your experience, your time in the Commission, as a starter on this issue?
Yes, Don, I would agree with you that the Eurozone debt crisis was a major threat to the EU. I think it exposed very deep structural weaknesses within monetary union. And I think there were serious fears and concerns of the Eurozone's potential collapse at the time. And it raised obviously very serious doubts about the viability of the euro as a currency, with the potential for some countries to leave the Eurozone. So, I mean, it was a very dramatic time. It was a big crisis. And I think it eroded public trust in many member states in the EU, and had, of course, the potential to spread wider if it hadn't been contained. But I mean, if I can quote the great Jean Monnet, who said, you know, Europe will be forged in crisis. Often crises drive the need for solutions and lead to, in the end, greater European integration in particular areas. And I think, you know, the Eurozone crisis led to the creation of mechanisms to prevent such things happening in the future. It strengthened the role of the European Central Bank as a lender of last resort. And likewise, the COVID pandemic led to, you know, joint procurement of vaccines. So we pushed the boat out there. And also the establishment of a European health emergency response, things that we had never thought of before, because we had to respond in that crisis. And now we have, you know, Russia's war against Ukraine, which is also leading to, probably will lead to, you know, well, obviously there's concerns about energy security and how we shore that up, but also increased defense and security spending. So, I mean, all these things, I think these crises can lead, I mean, we don't want them, but they happen. And then we have to look and see how we can change the architecture to try and ensure that they don't happen again, or take precautionary measures for the future. So, I mean, it's not, you know, but I would agree with you that the Euro crisis is the biggest one that the EU has faced to date.
Now that we're, I suppose, July 2020 with the Draghi speech of whatever it takes, we're exactly 13 years since it all calmed down quite suddenly after 2.5 years. What are the legacies of that crisis? Like, certainly here in Ireland, even the most strongest pro-integrationist people in politics, there was certainly plenty of people who felt we were bounced into a bailout. There was a sense that smaller countries were treated differently from bigger countries. Clearly, the case of Greece stood out in terms of how people felt, but there were very strong feelings around that time. And I certainly heard people speaking in ways that I'd never previously heard within the Commission and the institutions about member states, and that division between the North-South member states opening up, and Dutch finance minister famously sort of publicly making remarks about the behaviour of some of the southern counterparts. Has that healed in your view, or has that left a lasting sort of North-South division in the EU?
Well, I mean, I think different parts of the EU have different interests. You know, we have maybe a north-south divide in terms of you know, economic performance, fiscal policies, policy priorities. But you also have, for example, an east-west divide within the EU, where, you know, which is also manifested in economic disparities, tensions in areas such as, say, social policy, migration. So, I mean, there are different, we're a very diverse collection of member states, and there are different things. But I think a lot of lessons have been learned. I mean, lessons have been learned here, lessons have been learned in the institutions about how to handle, these crises. I mean, we would do a better job, all of us, probably, if we knew then what we know now. But I do think Ireland has always been a bit of an outlier in this classification. It doesn't really, I mean, it's not it doesn't fit into, say, the southern, box, if you like. It's a rich country with high GDP, and I don't think it has left a particular legacy in terms of that it's being, lumped in with countries that have other issues and other problems. So I think things could have been handled better. When I arrived, one of the first calls I had in 2010 was to set up meetings with the political parties in Ireland for Ollie Rehn, who was then the Economic and Monetary Affairs Commissioner, basically arriving to start negotiations on an EU IMF programme. And I have to say, there was a lot of denial about the situation Ireland was in, but Ireland was close to being locked out of any kind of lending, international lending. It needed to keep the schools open, the police paid, all hospitals running. I mean, it couldn't get that money on the international market. So it was a very difficult time. But I mean, Ireland got out of that situation in 3 years, and then didn't look back, basically, and has been a booming economy since then. So it's kind of a model in a way. Yes, of course, there was pain, but I think, the lessons learned are everywhere. And I think Ireland, has since restored its confidence and reputation. I mean, we just saw the Minister for Finance being elected for the third time as president of the Eurozone. So, I don't think there's any lasting legacy for Ireland in terms of its particular standing as a result of what happened back then.
And in terms of both political opinion and public opinion here, do you sense there has been any effect? Are politicians a little more wary about integration? And also in terms of public opinion, one still hears people feeling very strongly about the terms of the bailout, particularly around bank debt and the portion of that, though exaggerated, the portion of that was effectively the Irish government was forced not to default on it. Do you think that has had a lasting legacy, either at political class level or at public opinion level?
I mean, I don't really see that. I mean, I think obviously Ireland has to, manage its own economy. And, the legacy of what happened then, I mean, clearly don't over-rely on one source of the taxation, which was coming mainly from the property boom. I mean, I don't see that there's any reticence. I think Ireland is, is seen as a very pro-European country, basically signing up to a lot of EU initiatives. And I haven't noticed anything like that. But I do think, if looking back on that whole period, I think there was very bad information, public information, about, how Ireland got into this situation, why Ireland needed a bailout. And I remember, Dan, you yourself came on one of our roadshow events where we tried to explain to people in different parts of the country what precisely, why the bailout was necessary, and why it was actually a good thing to be in this program and to be able to keep the country functioning. And I mean, we were the only ones doing it at the time, the Commission representation. So, there wasn't great information about, about what was happening. And I think a lot of it was misconception as well. So we may have different views on that, but I do remember you coming along to one of those encounters at the time.
Yeah, and just for the record, I remember it well, and saying that it was necessary, but I was never happy about it. No, I don't think any of us thought it was a good thing that we had to be bailed out, although it was absolutely necessary when at the end of the day, when the chances of not being able to borrow to keep the public the state running was imminent. On wider alliance building and how alliances have changed, you've touched on the emergence of the Hanseatic, the Frugal Fours, the various alliances within the EU. Maybe we talk a little bit more about that and about Ireland's position, because we're not like the Benelux or the Nordics that have a natural group of alliances. How have that sort of alliance building changed, and is Ireland's position still sort of depending on the issue? And are we part of there's some confusion as to whether we are part of the Hanseatic League or not, or where our position lies on some of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, when you get to alliances, at the EU level, I mean, of course, we have the Franco-German alliance, which is the engine or the motor of European integration. I mean, those two countries have driven forward, many of the initiatives that have, subsequently been adopted and part and parcel of the infrastructure. The Benelux. There's the Weimar triangle of France, Germany, Poland, Nordic Council, Visegrad Group. You're right. As far as I know, Ireland is not really party to any of these particular alliances. And it does tend to build alliances, from my observation, on particular issues where they need, where it's good to have friends, shall we say, to get their point across. And, we see this, for example, on the Gaza issue. I mean, there's been quite a lot of alliance building with, say, Spain and Belgium. But I think Ireland does need to deepen its alliances to further its interests, because as a small member state, it's the way to go. But it can also be, I think, beneficial not to be necessarily, for example, Ireland to join the Frugal Four, say, as a net contributor to the EU budget. You might expect that. But I mean, Ireland's going to be in, for example, looking forward to next year's presidency, is going to be in a very tricky situation. It will be in the hot seat during the time when the budget negotiations will be advancing, and it will have to play the honest broker role, which is the presidency's, part and parcel of having the presidency. And I think it's probably good in this instance that Ireland isn't part particularly of, say, the Frugal Four, because it'll be able to play that role in a better way, the role of the presidency, and be seen as an honest broker. So there are times when it's possibly better not to be necessarily pin your colours to particular other member states' interests.
And two questions on the presidency, Barbara. How has that changed over time? It's certainly with the creation of the Antonio Costa role, it's clearly less important than it used to be. But is it important at all these days? And secondly, I sometimes think that, particularly smaller countries running the presidency, it means they actually can't pursue their interests as rigorously as they might wish to, because their responsibility is to try and sort of get agreement on things. Do you see any truth or in that sort of view that smaller countries actually, it's a bad thing? It diverts a lot of resources and they can't pursue their interests as rigorously as they might like to.
No, I think having the presidency is still a very prestigious and influential, thing to do, a role to play. I mean, you are driving forward the agenda. It's true, you inherit quite a lot from your predecessors in terms of what the priorities are. But I mean, it's up to the presidency really to decide what they push to some extent as well. and delivering an efficient and effective presidency with agreements on a number of areas is very much appreciated by the member states and the parliament, etc. So no, I think the presidency is a very important time. It's time to put your stamp, if you like, even a small member state, on the EU business, and therefore I think the attention it's getting, certainly in Ireland, from both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, I think it shows, I think, that there's quite a lot of commitment to have a very successful presidency. And by the way, Ireland is known for delivering very efficient, effective presidencies, and being a small member state can be a help in that things don't get lost in the mists, and it's easy for people to pick up the phone and try and sort things out with their colleagues or whoever necessary. So I think I would certainly think it's still very much seen as a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of other actors on the stage. You're right, Dan, but really, I think the member state that has the presidency has a very key role to play.
Okay, good. Let's moving back directly towards the Commission itself. Over your time working there, how have various policy areas changed? You were involved in social policy at one point, but looking at the role of the Commission in competition policy now, as we know, the Apple case, it has enormous powers to fine companies. Fiscal policy is another area. The creation of the euro and the euro crisis gave the Commission more sway over fiscal policy and budget rules and that sort of thing. Any particular reflections on individual areas of policy and where the Commission's role has changed, become more influential, less influential? Any insights there?
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say, the Commission's competences have developed enormously over the years. I mean, remember, we started out, when we started out in the 50s, 60s, 70s, really the focus was on, when we started out, the Commission's remit was really, just to establish the common market and the customs union. And then we saw, in the 1990s, the remit expanded to include, environmental protection, health and safety at work, social cohesion, economic and social cohesion. And my own experience of this was working in the social policy area, the heyday of social policy under Delors, where many key pieces of labour law, health and safety in the workplace, were adopted. I mean, you remember the famous Working Time Directive, which was challenged by the UK, Works Council's Anti-Discrimination, etc. So we had a huge, I would say, the heyday of social policy. And then we move on to other areas. Fiscal policy really had its big moment after, after the Eurozone crisis, which led to a strengthening of the EU's economic governance rules, with the 8 regulations and the one international treaty, the Fiscal Compact. And now, as we more recently, the focus obviously shifted with the first von der Leyen Commission. It was focused on, the European Green Deal, and of course digital policy regulation with the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. So we've had different phases of the Commission's role moving into different areas. And you mentioned competition policy. I mean, Peter Sutherland put a big stamp on that when he was commissioner, and it's become a very, very powerful tool. And I suppose the one area, or the area I'd pick out, if you like, where I suppose Commission, where I think we do need to have more development, is in the common foreign and security policy, where the Commission, or the EU, remains a sort of a political pygmy, as they say, an economic giant and a political pygmy. and where we probably, we need the requirement for unanimity in many foreign policy decisions can paralyze the EU's ability to act quickly and decisively in crisis situations. And we see that, for example, with sanctions on Russia. We see it with Gaza. So, that's really where we're going next, if you like, in terms of, the creation of a European Defence Union, all of these things that have now been thrown up by, for example, crises such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
And just, you mentioned defence. I sometimes think that we don't pay enough attention, or we're not as plugged into how things are in Brussels and the institution, just how defence has become the sort of #1 issue everyone's talking about. Any thoughts on that? Do I overstate that case, or what are your thoughts on just how defence has moved up the agenda in recent years, particularly since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022?
Well, I think this is the new reality we're living in. I mean, we have a situation where, I mean, if Russia succeeds in what it's trying to do, all those member states that are living next door to Russia, I mean, are rightly concerned about their future. And I mean, it's inevitable that we move to do this. And I mean, I think Ireland, I don't hear nobody questions Ireland's neutrality. That is, at least not in the EU context, but Ireland has to also play its role in terms of protecting, its own infrastructure in a situation where we have, cyber threats, subsea cables being cut, etc. So, I mean, these are the new areas where, we possibly wouldn't be going there if we didn't have geopolitical events such as, for example, possibly the United States not keeping its guarantees to protect Europe, etc. So we have a new reality to deal with, and it's inevitable, I think, that we look at these areas now going forward.
Okay. Bringing it back to Ireland, another big change reality is Ireland's position from most of its history as a member, as being a net beneficiary from the EU budget, to being, I think it's now the biggest per capita contributor. I don't see that Irish behaviour changing so much to reflect that really big shift. Any thoughts about that and how the net contributors tend to behave, whether Ireland's building alliances with them? Talk a little bit about that. It would be interesting to hear.
Well, I mean, Ireland, I think, has been a net contributor since about 2014. So it's not a new situation, but of course, as one of the richest member states, I mean, obviously the amounts are going to increase. I mean, as I said earlier, I think it's probably a good thing that they're not too aligned with the frugal member states, because they're going to have to play this role of honest broker during the presidency. I mean, people forget, I mean, Ireland got a lot of aid when it first joined the EU and has made, great progress with it, and is seen as a kind of a star in terms of how it used EU money. It still gets quite a lot of funds under the Common Agricultural Policy. So it is still, a beneficiary, not maybe a net beneficiary, but a beneficiary nonetheless. So I think, also we shouldn't really look, I mean, we can't pull up the drawbridge just because Ireland's okay. I mean, that's not how it works, and it's not how it should work. And other countries didn't do that to Ireland when Ireland was one of the poorest countries in the EU. So I think you have to be, but of course, nobody wants waste. And I think it's fair enough to look at what the EU is funding and decide, what is valid, what's not valid, what we want to keep, what we don't want to keep. And with the changing priorities, we also have to look at, traditional areas which got a lot of funding. Do we still continue with this? Do we need to shift funds to other things? So, I think all of that budget review, which, by the way, will be launched, I understand, next week, the Commission's proposal on the next MFF, multi-annual financial framework, that will, you know, but I mean, I think you're right in a way, Dan. You know, things have changed, but I think, you know, Ireland is, you know, still, I think, benefiting hugely from its EU membership. And I think the whole Brexit experience could be enough to remind people that it's worth being in a bigger grouping than trying to stand and fight on your own.
Yeah, there's not much demand for Irexit these days. A final one, Barbara. Having left the Commission, I don't know if you know whether any Irish nationals have joined since you left, but it's certainly been a noted thing that many people joined the Commission when Ireland joined. Irish people joined when Ireland joined, and it certainly, when I was at that stage of first jobs, it was an extremely prestigious place to work. One doesn't get that same impression today with 20-somethings, and certainly the numbers of Irish people in the Commission seem to be declining. Any thoughts on what could be done to make sure that there are Irish voices maintained within the institutions, including the Commission?
Well, I think the government and this government and the last government have been very active in trying to stimulate interest in EU careers. I mean, they increased the number of scholarships to places like the College of Europe. They have been encouraging young people to apply for traineeships in the different institutions, and they've tried, you know, there's been a proactive cooperation between both the Commission and the Parliament offices here in Dublin with the Department of Foreign Affairs to try and promote EU careers. But I do think that things were left go before that for a while. There was, you know, not attention shone on it and no effort really put in. And I think Ireland is paying a bit for that gap, if you like, because you don't have very many people coming into the top levels anymore. It'll take time for the people now who are coming in, and the numbers are improving, to come through. But I mean, there was, you know, it's something that I think is now high on the agenda, which is great. But there was, unfortunately, I would say, a gap left for a number of years, and now Ireland is playing catch up in a way to maintain that. But Ireland is not the only one, I may say. There's a lot of countries that have, I mean, Scandinavians are in a similar situation. Even the Germans are underrepresented, which when you take their population, etc., size into account. So I think we need to be do our best about trying to how would I say, influence young people to think about a career in the EU institutions, and to you know, and to get, I mean, the civil service itself here have seconded quite a lot of people, and some of those will stay on. They will pass the competition and stay on in the Commission. So I think all of those things are going to start paying dividends, and have started, I think, already. But unfortunately, there was a gap for a certain amount of time where very little action was taken.
Okay, Barbara, we've hit the 45 minutes. I'd like to thank you. It's always great to get civil servants' views of things from the inside. So really thanks to you for joining us and sharing those thoughts about your extensive experience with the Commission, particularly on such a beautiful summer's day in the middle of summer. So look, we look forward to, we know you'll be back to the Institute in various ways in the future. Look forward to seeing you again. And again, thanks so much for joining us to share your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan.